Little Red Riding Hood. There was once a sweet little maid, much beloved by everybody, but most of all by her grandmother, who never knew how to make enough of her. Once she sent her a little riding hood of red velvet, and as it was very becoming of her, and she never wore anything else, people called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her,
"Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here are some cakes and a flask of wine for you to take to grandmother. She is weak and ill, and they will do her good. Make haste now, and start before it grows hot. And walk properly and nicely, and don't run, or you might fall and break the flask of wine, and there would be none left for grandmother. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, instead of staring about you."
I will be sure to take care,
said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand upon it. Now the grandmother lived away in the wood, half an hour's walk from the village. And when Little Red Riding Hood had reached the wood, she met a wolf. But as she did not know what a bad sort of animal he was, she did not feel frightened. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf.
"Thank you kindly, Wolf,"
said she. "Where are you going so early, Little Red Riding Hood?"
"To my grandmother's.
"What are you carrying under your apron?"
Cakes and wine we baked yesterday, and my grandmother is very weak and ill, so they will do her good and strengthen her."
"Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?"
"A quarter of an hour's walk from here. Her house stands beneath the 3 oak trees, and you may know it by the hazel bushes."
The wolf thought to himself, "That tender young thing would be a delicious morsel, and would taste better than the old grandmother, but I must manage somehow to get both of them." Then he walked by Little Red Riding Hood a little while, and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, just look at the pretty flowers that are growing all around you, and I don't think you are listening to the songs of the birds. You are going along just as if you were going to school, and it is so delightful out here in the wood." Little Red Riding Hood glanced round her, and when she saw the sunbeams darting here and there through the trees, and lovely flowers everywhere, she thought to herself,
"If I were to take a fresh bouquet to my grandmother, she would be very pleased, and it is so early in the day that I shall reach her in plenty of time."
And so she ran about in the wood looking for flowers. And as she picked one, she saw a still prettier one a little farther off, and so she went further and further into the wood. But the wolf went straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door.
"Who's there?"
"Little Red Riding Hood," he answered, "and I have brought you some cake and wine. Please open the door."
"Lift the latch. I am too feeble to get up."
So the wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open, and he fell on the grandmother and ate her up without saying one word. Then he drew on her clothes, put on her cap, lay down in her bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood was all this time running about among the flowers, and when she had gathered as many as she could hold, she remembered her grandmother and set off to go to her. She was surprised to find the door standing open, and when she came inside, she felt very strange and thought to herself,
"Oh dear, how uncomfortable I feel, and I was so glad this morning to go to my grandmother."
And when she said,
"Good morning,"
there was no answer. Then she went up to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay the grandmother, with her cap pulled over her eyes, so that she looked very odd.
"Oh, grandmother, what large ears you have."
"The better to hear you with, my dear."
"Oh, grandmother, what great eyes you have."
the better to see you with.
Oh, grandmother, what large hands you have.
The better to take hold of you with.
But grandmother, what a terrible large mouth you have.
The better to devour you with. And no sooner had the wolf said it than he made one bound from the bed and swallowed up poor Little Red Riding Hood. Then the wolf, having satisfied his hunger, lay down again in the bed, went to sleep, and began to snore loudly. The huntsman heard him as he was passing by the house and thought, "How the old woman snores! I had better see if there is anything the matter with her." Then he went into the room and walked up to the bed and saw the wolf lying there. "At last I find you, old sinner. I have been looking for you for a long time." And he made up his mind that the wolf had swallowed the grandmother whole, and that she might yet be saved. So he did not fire his rifle, but took a pair of scissors and began to slit up the wolf's body. When he made a few snips, Little Red Riding Hood appeared, and after a few more snips, she jumped out and cried,
Oh dear, how frightened I have been. It is so dark inside the wolf.
and then out came the old grandmother, still living and breathing. But Little Red Riding Hood went and quickly fetched some large stones, with which she filled the wolf's body, so that when he waked up and was going to rush away, the stones were so heavy that he sank down and fell dead. They were all three very pleased. The huntsman took off the wolf's skin and carried it home. The grandmother ate the cakes and drank the wine and held her head again. And Little Red Riding Hood said to herself that she would never more stray about in the wood alone, but would mind what her mother told her. It must also be related how a few days afterwards, when Little Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to her grandmother, another wolf spoke to her, and wanted to tempt her to leave the path. But she was on her guard, and went straight on her way, and told her grandmother how that the wolf had met her, and wished her good day, but had looked so wickedly at her that she thought if it had not been on the high road, he would have devoured her.
Come this way. We will shut the door so that he may not get in.
Soon after came the wolf knocking at the door, and calling out, "Open the door, grandmother! I am Little Red Riding Hood, bringing you cakes." But they remained still, and did not open the door. After that, the wolf slunk by the house, and got at last upon the roof, to wait until Little Red Riding Hood should return home in the evening. Then he meant to spring down upon her, and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother discovered his plot. Now there stood before the house a great stone trough, and the grandmother said to the child,
Little Red Riding Hood, I was spoiling sausages yesterday, so take the bucket and carry away the water they were boiled in, and pour it into the trough.
And Little Red Riding Hood did so, until the great trough was quite full. When the smell of the sausages reached the nose of the wolf, he sniffed it up, and looked all around, and then stretched out his neck so far that he lost his balance and began to slip. He slipped down off the roof, straight into the great trough, and was drowned. Then Little Red Riding Hood went cheerfully home and came to no harm. The end. The Good Bargain. A peasant had led his cow to the market and sold her for $7. On his way home, he had to pass a pond, but long before he reached it, he could hear the frogs crying, "Eight, eight, eight, eight." "Yes, I hear you, screaming out of your snug quarters. But it's 7 I've received, not 8. As soon as he reached the water, he exclaimed, "Stupid creatures that you are! Don't you know better? $7 are not 8. The frogs, taking no heed, continued to cry, "8, 8, 8, 8. Now, if you don't believe me, I can count it out for you." And he took the money out of his pocket and counted out his $7. The frogs cared nothing for the peasant's reckoning, but went on croaking, "8, 8, 8, 8, 8. Then the peasant was in a rage. "Oh, do you know better how to count than I do?" And he threw the money into the water right in the midst of them. Then he stood and waited till they were ready to return his property to him. But the frogs were constant to their first opinion, and screamed out still louder, "8, 8, 8, 8, and did not attempt to throw the money back to him. He waited for a good while till evening came on, and he knew he must go home. Then he abused the frogs and cried, "You water splashers! You thickheads! You blind eyes! With your great jaws you can scream enough to split one's ears, but you do not know how to count 7, and you do not think I am going to stay here and wait till you are ready." Then he walked away very fast, but he heard the frog still croaking, "8, 8, 8, 8, for a long distance, and he arrived home quite out of humor. After a time he bought another cow, which he slaughtered, and while reckoning how much he should get by the sale of the flesh, as well as the skin, he hoped to make a good bargain with profits, even with the loss caused by the obstinacy of the frogs. So he started off to the town to sell his dead cow. But on arriving at the butcher's stall, he saw a pack of hounds, who all surrounded him, barking and smelling at the meat. What? "Oh, yes, it is all very well to say what, as if you wanted to know what I have got here, and you know it is meat all the while." There was no one to watch the butcher's shop, but a large house dog, and the countryman had often heard his master say how true and faithful he was. So he said to him, "If I leave this meat here, will you answer for these friends of yours that it shan't be touched?" What? cried the dog, while the others barked, What? and sprang at the meat. Then said the peasant to the butcher's dog, "Oh well, as you have promised, I will leave the meat for your master to sell. But remember, I must have the money in 3 days, and if he doesn't send it, then I shall come for it." Thereupon he laid the meat down on the counter and turned to go. The dogs all ran round it, barking, What? And the peasant heard them for a long distance. "Ah, they are all longing for a piece, but it's all right. The big one is answerable for them." 3 days passed, and the countryman made himself quite comfortable in the thought of what he was to receive. "I shall have plenty of money in my pocket tomorrow evening," he said in a contented tone. But tomorrow came, and no money. He waited 2 days, and then said, "I can't stand this. I must go and demand my money." The butcher at first thought he was talking about a sparrow. "Sparrow, indeed! I want my money for the meat I left under the care of your great dog 3 days ago, the flesh of a whole cow." At this the butcher flew in a rage, and seizing a broom, laid it over the peasant's shoulders and drove him out of the shop. "Just wait! There is some justice after all left in the world." And away he went to the castle, where it happened that on that day the king himself sat as chief magistrate with his daughter by his side. "What is your trouble?" asked the king. "Alas, your majesty, the frogs and the dogs have taken all I possess, and when I asked the butcher for my money, he beat me with a broomstick." And then he related in a confused manner all that had occurred. On hearing the countryman's story, the king's daughter burst into a fit of laughter, and laughed so loudly that for some minutes the king himself could not speak. At length he said, "I cannot restore to you the money you have lost, but I can give you my daughter in marriage. She has never during her whole life laughed till now. I long ago promised her as a wife to the first man who could make her laugh, and you are that man, so you may thank heaven for your good fortune." "Ah, my lord king, I cannot marry the princess. I have one wife at home already, and she is quite too much for me to manage. There is no room for another in our chimney corner." Then the king was angry and said, "You are a rude clown." "Oh, my lord king, what can you expect from a pig but a grunt?" And he turned to go. "Stay!" cried the king, calling him back. "I mean you to have some reward after all. 500 times as much as you have lost shall be ready for you if you come here again in 3 days." The peasant looked so joyful as he passed out after hearing this, that the sentinel asked him the cause. "You have made the princess laugh, I hear. What reward are you to have?" $500. "Why, what will you do with all that money?" "You may as well give me some." "I will if you like. And if you will go with me to the king in 3 days, he shall pay you $200 instead of me." And away he went. A moneylender who was standing near overheard this promise, and running after the peasant, pulled him by the sleeve and said, "You are a lucky fellow, friend, to have all that money promised you. But you must wait 3 days for it. Would you not like to receive it at once, cash down?" "I should indeed. How can it be managed?" "Oh, very easily. You shall give me an order to receive the $300, and I will pay you the amount in silver and small coin." So the bill of exchange was drawn, and the money paid, but the moneylender charged such enormous interest, and some of the coins were so bad, that the peasant did not get much after all. At the end of the 3 days, the peasant went to the king, according to his command. "You must open your pockets very wide to receive all these dollars." "Oh no, they do not belong to me. 200 I have promised to the sentinel, and I have given a moneylender a bill to receive 300, as he has given me cash for it, so that I have justly nothing to receive." While he spoke, in came the soldier and the moneylender, who demanded what they had obtained from the peasant, and persisted that the money was justly theirs. At first the king could not help laughing at the countryman's folly, and then he became angry at the conduct of the moneylender and the soldier. So then he said to the peasant, "As you have been so foolish as to give up your money before it even belonged to you, to strangers, I suppose I must make you some compensation. Go into that room opposite and help yourself to as much money as your pockets will hold." The countryman did not require to be told twice. He went as he was told, and filled his wide pockets to overflowing. Away he started to the inn to count his money, and the moneylender sneaked after him and heard him talking to himself. "Now if I had been a knave and had hidden all this from the king, he would never have allowed me to take this money. I wish I knew how much I had. Oh, if the king had only told me what amount I was to take. I am so afraid I may have taken more than I ought. Aha! He is grumbling even now, and speaking disrespectfully of my lord the king. Catch me quarreling with such a sum of money because I couldn't count it. The moneylender had spoken loud enough for the king to hear, and he called him and desired him to fetch the ungrateful man again before his majesty. You must appear before the king immediately. There must be no excuse. Indeed, I cannot. Whoever heard of a man with such a heap of gold in his pockets as I have, gang before the king in such a ragged coat as this? The moneylender, seeing that the peasant was determined, and fearing that the wrath of the king would cool, promised to lend him a coat, which was very good and nearly new. I lend you this coat for true friendship's sake, and that is seldom done in the world. So he put it on, and went into the king's presence. But when the king repeated what he had been told by the moneylender, the peasant exclaimed, Your Majesty, it is all false. There is never a true word out of that moneylender's mouth. I dare say he will affirm that the coat I have on belongs to him. What do you mean? You know it is my coat. I lend it to you out of pure friendship, that you might appear before the king. Yes, of course, to hear your lies about me, and get punished by having the money taken from me. Then he repeated what he really said at the inn, and the king dismissed them both, saying that the moneylender's word was evidently not to be taken, and therefore the countryman might keep the coat as his own as some recompense for the moneylender's false accusation. The peasant went home joyfully to count the gold in his pockets, and then said to himself, This time at least I have made a good bargain. The end. The Singing Bone. A certain country was greatly troubled by a wild boar that attacked workers in the fields, killed men, and tore them to pieces with its terrible tusks. The king of the country had offered rich rewards to anyone who would rid the land of this terror. But the beast was so huge and ferocious that no man could even be persuaded to enter the forest where the animal made its home. At last the king made a proclamation that he would give his only daughter in marriage to any man who would bring the wild boar to him, dead or alive. There lived 2 brothers in that country, the sons of a poor man, who gave notice of their readiness to enter on this perilous undertaking. The elder, who was clever and crafty, was influenced by pride. The younger, who was innocent and simple, offered himself from kindness of heart. Thereupon the king advised that, as the best and safest way would be to take opposite directions in the wood, the elder was to go in the evening, and the younger in the morning. The younger had not gone far, when a little fairy stepped up to him. He held in his hand a black spear and said,
I will give you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With this you can go out and discover the wild boar, and he shall not be able to harm you.
He thanked the little man, took the spear, placed it on his shoulder, and without delay went further into the forest. It was not long before he espied the animal coming toward him, and fiercely making ready to spring. But the youth stood still, and held the spear firmly in front of him. In wild rage the fierce beast ran violently toward him, and was met by the spear. on the point of which he threw himself, and as it pierced his heart, he fell dead. Then the youngster took the dead monster on his shoulder and went to find his brother. As he approached the other side of the wood, there stood a large hall, where he heard music and found a number of people dancing, drinking wine and making merry. His elder brother was among them, for he thought the wild boar would not run far away, and he wished to get up his courage for the evening by cheerful company and wine. When he caught sight of his younger brother coming out of the forest laden with his booty, the most restless jealousy and malice rose in his heart. But he disguised his bitter feelings, and spoke kindly to his brother and said, "Come in and stay with us, dear brother, and rest a while, and get up your strength by a cup of wine." So the youth, not suspecting anything wrong, carried the dead boar into his brother's house, and told him of the little man he had met in the wood, who had given him the spear, and how he had killed the wild animal. The elder brother persuaded him to stay and rest till evening, and then they went out together in the twilight and walked by the river until it became quite dark. A little bridge lay across the river, over which they had to pass, and the elder brother let the young one go on before him. When they arrived at the middle of the stream, the wicked man gave his younger brother a blow from behind, and he fell down dead instantly. But fearing he might not be quite dead, he threw the body over the bridge into the river, and through the clear waters saw it sink into the sand. After this wicked deed, he ran home quickly, took the wild boar on his shoulders, and carried it to the king, with the pretense that he had killed the animal, and that therefore he should claim the princess as his wife, according to the king's promise. But these dark deeds are not often concealed, for something happens to bring them to light. Not many years after, a herdsman passing over the bridge with his flock saw beneath him in the sand a little bone as white as snow, and thought that it would make a very nice mouthpiece for his horn. As soon as the flock passed over the bridge, he waded into the middle of the stream, for the water was very shallow, took up the bone, and carried it home to make a mouthpiece for his horn. But the first time he blew the horn, after the bone was in it, it filled the herdsman with wonder and amazement, for it began to sing of itself, and these were the words it sang. "Ah, dear shepherd, you are blowing your horn with one of my bones, which night and morn lie still unburied beneath the wave, where I was thrown in a sandy grave. I killed the wild boar, and my brother slew me, and gained the princess by pretending 'twas he." "What a wonderful horn, that can sing of itself! I must certainly take it to the Lord my king," said the shepherd. As soon as the horn was brought before the king, and blown by the shepherd, it at once began to sing the same song and the same words. The king was at first surprised, but his suspicion being aroused, he ordered that the sand under the bridge should be examined immediately, and then the entire skeleton of the murdered man was discovered, and the whole wicked deed came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed. He was therefore ordered to be tied in a sack and drowned, while the remains of his murdered brother were carefully carried to the churchyard and laid to rest in a beautiful grave. The end.